All right, so $300 billion.
Wow.
That's the number, right?
Yeah.
That's the big number everyone's talking about with this Boeing F-47
Yeah, the F-47.
winning the Air Force NGAD contract.
Huge, huge deal, right?
It is, but,
There's always more to the story.
Of course, we like to dig a little deeper here. And what's really interesting is that with this same NGAD program, there's this whole other story developing
Yeah.
about a potential forgotten winner, I guess you could say.
Yeah.
And that's Northrop Grumman.
Absolutely. I think that's a great way to put it. The F-47 win, it makes sense. It's grabbing all the headlines.
Right.
But the possibility of Northrop Grumman playing a big part in NGAD,
Yeah.
specifically with the Navy's F/A-XX, the next generation fighter,
Right.
that's something we need to pay attention to. This isn't just some small detail. This could really change how we think about air dominance in the future.
Absolutely. And that's why in this deep dive, we're not just going to rehash the F-47 news. We really want to understand why Northrop Grumman's potential role, specifically with this F/A-XX, is so important and why more people aren't talking about it. Now, for anyone who's new to this whole thing, NGAD isn't just about a single plane. It's imagined as a family of systems. And what that means is you have this really advanced manned fighter jet working together with a network of autonomous drones.
Mm-hmm.
And it's all powered by AI, super stealthy, and with the range that's going to be crucial in future conflicts.
Right. And just to be clear, this family we're talking about, it has two main aircraft. There's the F-47, which Boeing's going to be building for the Air Force, and that will eventually replace the F-22 Raptor. But then there's the F/A-XX, which is specifically designed for the Navy to take over for the Super Hornet and the Growler.
Okay, so this two-track approach, separate planes for the Air Force and the Navy, it seems like a pretty big lesson learned from, the F-35 program, right?
Right.
Remember how they initially wanted just one core design for everyone?
Exactly. The F-35, it was a huge, ambitious project, no question. But the idea that you could have that much commonality across all the branches,
Yeah.
it didn't really work out as planned. It ended up costing more and taking longer to develop. So with NGAD, what we're seeing is this acknowledgement that what the Air Force needs and what the Navy needs are different. Their missions are different. The environments they operate in are different.
Right.
Trying to force them to use the same plane, it just leads to compromises, and no one ends up with what they really need. Different branches, different needs.
All right, so let's focus on the Navy side of this.
Yeah.
You mentioned the F/A-XX replacing the Super Hornet and the Growler.
Right.
But some people might be thinking, well, doesn't the Navy already have the F-35C? So why would they need another brand new, cutting-edge fighter?
That's a good question, and I think it's important to understand that the F-35C was never meant to completely replace the Super Hornets and Growlers. It was always intended to work alongside them and enhance their capabilities. The F-35C has its own unique strengths, especially when it comes to stealth and sensor fusion. That's basically its ability to take data from all these different sensors and combine it into a single, clear picture for the pilot. But with the F/A-XX, the goal is to make a much bigger jump forward in areas that are going to be crucial for the Navy in the future.
So what exactly are those game-changing capabilities we're talking about here? What will the F/A-XX be able to do that the F-35C, as impressive as it is, can't quite manage?
Well, the really exciting thing here is the focus on naval air power in the Pacific, especially with all the vast distances involved there. The F/A-XX is supposed to have a much greater range than anything we have now, which is crucial for operating across that kind of space.
Makes sense.
We're also talking about next-level AI integration, built in from the ground up. And the level of autonomy we're going to see with these aircraft is going to be completely different. They're also aiming for even stealthier designs than current platforms. And, this is a big one, they're making it so that the F/A-XX can work seamlessly with drone wingmen, which will multiply the combat power of a single manned aircraft.
Wow.
So while the F-35C is a valuable asset, the F/A-XX is designed to handle the threats and challenges of tomorrow.
Right, so that explains why they need it. So who are the companies competing to build this F/A-XX? It sounds like it's narrowed down quite a bit.
It has, yeah. In the beginning, you had the big three, Lockheed Martin, Boeing, and Northrop Grumman, all competing for both the Air Force's F-47 and the Navy's F/A-XX. But then back in 2023, Northrop Grumman decided to pull out of the F-47 competition.
Interesting.
And then just a few months ago, in March of this year, Lockheed Martin either withdrew or was eliminated from the F/A-XX race.
Okay, so that leaves us with...
Exactly. Just two left standing, Boeing and Northrop Grumman.
Now, you might think that because Boeing just won this massive F-47 contract, they'd be the favorite for the F/A-XX as well. But from what we've been reading, it seems like Northrop Grumman might actually have the upper hand. Why is that?
Well, it all comes down to this bigger strategic picture. The Department of Defense, they really like to spread things around when it comes to these major weapon systems. They don't want to have just one company building everything. Giving both the F-47 and the F/A-XX to Boeing,
Yeah.
it just wouldn't fit with how they usually do things.
Okay, so what are the reasons for that? Why do they prefer to spread the work around like that?
There are a few key reasons. First, it keeps prices down. When you have competition, companies have to be more efficient with their costs. Second, it encourages innovation. Companies know that if they want to win these big contracts, they need to be pushing the boundaries of technology.
Right.
And finally, it's a way to manage risk. If you only have one company making something and they run into problems, it can really impact your ability to defend yourself.
It's like putting all your eggs in one basket.
Exactly. So since Boeing's already got the F-47, there's a strong argument to be made that the Navy should go with Northrop Grumman for the F/A-XX.
That makes sense from a strategic standpoint.
Mm.
Now, the article we read mentions this idea that some people might see Northrop Grumman as not having enough recent experience with fighter jets because they haven't been the main contractor on a fighter program for a while.
Yeah.
But is that a fair assessment of what they can do?
I don't think so at all. It's easy to overlook Northrop Grumman because they haven't been in the spotlight as much lately.
Right.
But they've been doing a lot of important work on some of the most advanced aircraft we have right now. Take the F-35, for example. They build the center fuselage,
Wow.
which is a major structural part of the plane. They also make the radars and the communication systems. That's a really high level of expertise, and it shows they're a big part of the fighter jet world.
So they're kind of like the power behind the throne,
Yeah.
even if they aren't always the ones getting the final credit. And speaking of history, the article talks about how the Super Hornet, which the F/A-XX will eventually replace, actually has some Northrop Grumman DNA in it.
That's right. If you go back to the 1970s, the Navy knew they needed a new multi-role combat aircraft. So they started this program called the Navy Air Combat Fighter Program, and Northrop Grumman came up with a design called the YF-17. Interestingly, at the same time, the Air Force was looking for a new lightweight fighter, and they ended up choosing what became the F-16.
Okay.
But the Navy decided to go with Northrop's YF-17, which had 2 engines and was known for being really tough, which made it great for carrier operations.
But the YF-17 didn't become the Super Hornet directly, did it? What happened there?
Well, this is where things get a little complicated. The Navy might have liked Northrop's design,
Yeah.
but the main contract to actually build the Navy version went to a company called McDonnell Douglas. Northrop ended up with a smaller contract to build a land-based version for other countries to buy. Then, a few years later, Boeing bought McDonnell Douglas and got the whole FA-18 program, which included what eventually became the Super Hornet. So even though Boeing makes the Super Hornet now,
Right.
the original design came from Northrop Grumman.
That's a connection I bet a lot of people don't know about.
It's a bit of forgotten history.
It is. So Northrop Grumman had this great design that even kind of came up with the idea that led to the Super Hornet. But then they weren't the main contractor for big programs like the F-22, and they were a supplier for the F-35, but not the leader.
Mm.
So why is everyone saying now that they're in such a good position for the F/A-XX? What's changed?
Well, a few things have happened. First, they've had this big success with the B-21 Raider, which is a stealth bomber.
Right.
And that's really shown what they're capable of. They've managed to keep this incredibly complex project, the B-21 program, pretty much on schedule and on budget, even with everything going on in the world. And our sources call that digital engineering excellence, which means they're really good at program management and using the latest engineering techniques.
Makes sense.
Then, even though they haven't been the main contractor on a fighter jet lately, they've still got all the knowledge and experience from designing fighters in the past. That hasn't just disappeared.
Right.
And then, of course, there's the strategic balance we were talking about earlier.
Right, with the big three.
Exactly. If Northrop Grumman wins the F/A-XX contract, it would basically bring back what we used to have, where Lockheed Martin, Boeing, and Northrop Grumman were all making fighter jets. And that creates competition, which is good for everyone.
So why is it so important for the Pentagon to have these 3 big companies all making fighters?
Well, Pentagon wants to make sure we have a strong defense industry.
Of course.
And having 3 companies competing is a good way to do that. It pushes them to be more innovative, it gives the Pentagon more options, and it helps make sure we'll always have someone who can build these planes.
Like we were saying before, not putting all your eggs in one basket.
Right. Lockheed Martin is already focused on the F-35, so having both Boeing and Northrop Grumman working on these next-generation planes just makes things more secure.
And we can't forget about Northrop Grumman's expertise in stealth technology, which is going to be essential for these future planes.
Absolutely. I mean, look at what they did with the B-2 Spirit and the B-21 Raider.
Yeah.
They are the best when it comes to designing stealth aircraft. That's going to be so important for sixth-generation fighters, where the goal is to stay hidden from the enemy. They're way ahead of the game in that area.
So this FAXX contract is a pretty big deal, money-wise. The article said it could be worth over $150 billion. Is that a realistic number?
Oh, yeah, definitely. The Navy has about 500 Super Hornets right now.
Wow.
So replacing all of those with FAXXs, plus all the research and development, the maintenance, and any upgrades they might need in the future, you're easily talking about over $150 billion. It's a huge program.
Yeah. And what would winning this contract mean for Northrop Grumman? It sounds like it would be a game changer for them.
It would be huge. For them, the FAXX would be their main program in the world of military aircraft for the next couple of decades. It would help offset any problems or delays they might have with the B-21 program down the line. And most importantly, it would make them a major player in the fighter jet business again, which they haven't been for a long time.
So to sum it all up, while Boeing winning the F-47 contract was big news, Northrop Grumman's potential involvement in the FAXX program is a really important development in the future of air power, even if it hasn't got as much attention.
Exactly. It's a story with a lot of interesting layers to it.
It is.
You've got the historical connections, the strategic considerations, the cutting-edge technology, and how the defense industry is constantly changing. Whoever ends up building the FAXX, it's going to have a major impact on the Navy's ability to control the skies and on the aerospace industry as a whole.
So here's something to think about. We've talked about what it would mean to have these three big companies, Lockheed Martin, Boeing, and Northrop Grumman, all making fighter jets again. How would that affect innovation? Would it make things more competitive? How would it impact national security in the long run? But let's take it a step further. What about other companies or organizations, maybe in completely different fields, that are quietly working on things that could shape the future in ways we haven't even thought of yet? Sometimes the most important stories aren't the ones making the headlines right now.
That's a great point, and it's something we should all be paying attention to.
Absolutely.
What's happening behind the scenes, what's being developed that we don't even know about yet.
Right.
Those could be the things that really change the world.
That's it for this deep dive. We'll be back next week with another fascinating look at what's shaping the future. Thanks for listening.
Thanks, everyone.